I had the coolest job that any electrical engineer could ever have on the ground crew for Solar Impulse 2, the first solar-powered airplane to fly around the world only using the power of the sun. IEEE USA has given me a competitive edge because of their support system. It is so much easier doing something and being out of your comfort zone when you have someone there saying, "You got this." IEEE USA is more than just a network. It's a family.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to today's IEEE USA Livestream webinar, Elevate Your Impact. I'm your host, Jonathan Cho. Today's webinar is the first in our Elevate Your Impact series presented by certified career strategist and executive coach, Aaron Urban. For more information on the upcoming ones in the series, you can check them out through the link provided on the stream below, as well as in the comment section. IEEE USA's goal is to create programming that is valuable, relevant, and of interest to you. As such, we will be sending a short survey to all registrants after this event and would love your feedback. We value your opinions and would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes and share your thoughts. Along with being an executive leadership coach, Aaron Urban is an international speaker, neuroscience nerd, and host of the Career Coffee Chat podcast. She's also the author of the best-selling book, Elevate Your Career, More Impact plus More Income, and a Forbes Coaches Council member, certified in leadership psychology with over a decade in mentoring and coaching successful professional transformation through one-on-one coaching and group workshops. Without further ado, I will now pass it off to our presenter. Welcome, Aaron. Glad you could join us today.
I'm so thrilled to be here, and welcome to the Never Normal. So as many of you already figured out, we're in this constant change life cycle. Now, I'd love to hear from you and where you are tuning in from around the world, and whether you are here in the afternoon, the morning, and the evening. Welcome again to Elevate Your Impact. So I'd love to hear from you and welcome you to this webinar today to learn about how to speak up, stand out, and move up in the quote-unquote never normal. So feel free to pop your comments in the comment section, and of course we will have a Q&A at the end. So again, I want to welcome you to this never normal world we're living in, a cycle of constant and compounding change enlivened by the increasing technology innovation. Now, we're in an era of constant compounding change, yes, and our brains are built to handle this. Actually, we've evolved to be uncertainty averse. In fact, as Ray Kurzweil, director of the engineering at Google and the chancellor at Singularity University, suggests, the 21st century will be the equivalent of 20,000 years of progress at today's rate. McKinsey & Company estimates that change is happening at roughly about 10 times faster, 300 times the scale, and roughly about 3,000 times the impact than it used to be. I don't know about you, but when I read this, I realized, wow, that's why we're all feeling like we're drinking from a fire hose. So let me know if this resonates with you. Do you feel like you're drinking through a fire hose at this moment? I know I sure do. So great to see all of you tuning in today. Again, pop your comments let me know where you're tuning in from, because we are standing on the threshold of a very exciting time. Yet many professionals are struggling to adapt to this shifting environment. Our discussion's purpose today is to shed light on what you can do and adjust to develop your resilience while achieving personal peak performance, even during difficult times. So I'm excited to share these key strategies that leaders at all levels can leverage to stand out, speak up, and move up in the quote-unquote never normal. So what's different? Well, much has shifted since 2019, and it goes far beyond the obvious workplace and environmental changes. The people you interact with are actually fundamentally different and will respond differently to change than they did prior to 2020. This diagram gives you an overview of some of that change and what we're seeing and needing to do as a process, as a person, so your people process, if you will, to rise above, and again, as I mentioned, stand out, speak up, and move up, and thrive and elevate your impact in this never normal. So technology and innovation have made massive strides in a short time frame, and this has been fueled by the pandemic and cultural drivers as well. In addition, the continued climate of uncertainty has saturated most people's capacity for additional stress and compounded those short attention spans we've all been noticing. This has implications for the future of work, and we must evolve our approach to increase our influence, lead more effectively, and access those key opportunities. With this in mind, we'll focus on these aspects in 4 areas that I've highlighted on this diagram that describes the shift that empowers elevated impact in the future of work. Within these 4 areas, we'll touch on the following topics to empower you with the knowledge to thrive, even during turbulent times. You're an expert and you're accomplished in your field, so let's combine your expertise with mine to elevate your impact. But first, I want to know, why is this topic important to you? So pop your comments in the comments section, whether you're tuning in live across the world. I want to hear from you. Why is this topic important to you? Why do you want to elevate your impact in the never normal, and what are you seeing? So while you think about your answer, I'll share with you the catalyst behind why I'm so passionate about empowering people like you to live their best lives and do their best work. Well, first of all, years ago, I had a lot of what you might call career advancement myths, right? For example, there should be a firm line between personal and professional life. One should not necessarily come to work to make friends. And if you really want to get something done, then you probably should do it yourself. Does any of this sound familiar? Well, one fine February morning, I went into my performance review expecting the usual pat on the back and no particular salary raise. Halfway through said performance review, while I got all the usual accolades and yes, you're doing a wonderful job and you're exceeding expectations as usual, I heard these words. We have some concerns. These are not words you want to hear in your professional performance review. Needless to say, I was shocked. And in my shock, I heard that I was not perceived the way I thought I was perceived. In fact, people didn't necessarily like working with me because I was too demanding. I held my expectations very high, and they really couldn't relate with me. I was not a people person. Oops. Well, I'd love to say I walked out of this performance review and saw the light and I was a different person. That's really not how it works. I had the usual grieving period. I was mad at everybody and frustrated. And of course, everybody knew I was ticked off. And fortunately, I had also had a mentor at that time who saw my potential and intervened in my grumpiness and gave me a path forward into understanding what leadership and professional growth was all about. And that path forward opened my eyes forever. In fact, my very first self-development book helped me understand that all the behaviors that I thought were serving me were actually sabotaging me and my career growth. So the story has a happy ending. Within about 9 months, after some small yet significant behavior changes, I was elevated into a leadership role. Now, this particular aha moment in my career kind of fueled a passion for sharing this ability to become that person which elevates your impact. You can truly be anyone within reason that you want to become. But most people don't believe they can. So that's why I'm so powerful, I'm so impassioned about this powerful work that we can do together. So I'm really excited to share this with you. And also seeing some people turning in from DFW, Puerto Rico, Houston, Texas, of course, Pittsburgh, all over the nation. It's great to see you, all of you, Central New Jersey, Silicon Valley, the DC swamp. That's funny. Thank you. Reno, Central New Jersey, Salt Lake City. Great to see all of you tuning in. Eric mentioned the top talents of the workplace are the talent demands rather of the workplace are changing faster than the organizations we have impact within. You're right about that, Eric. Resourcefulness, impactful interactions, and change are the key to future success. Amen to that. So Brian also mentions making productive change work, especially in larger global companies, requires standing up and standing out to get heard and a green light to move change. Yes, so we'll be talking more about these topics. Thank you for sharing. And again, don't be shy. Continue to add your comments into the comment section. We will pause from time to time, and of course, we'll have Q&A at the end. So thank you for sharing why this topic is important to you. So let's look a little bit about the why behind what we're experiencing and what we can expect in the future of work. So feel free to share with me and let me know what you think is driving some of these changes we're experiencing. So let's just see here. Okay, so we went through that one. Sorry about this. I was losing my place. I was getting so excited and passionate about everything I was getting ready to share with you. So let's talk about some of the drivers. Now we'll touch on some of these. We won't go into obsessive detail because a lot of it you probably already know. For example, in 2020 and 2021, Americans worked around 30% more than normal, often putting in 12 to 15-hour days. Let me know if this resonates with you. I know I certainly did, and I saw a lot of my clients doing the same. So what do you think the result of that was? If you're thinking exhaustion, stress, etc., unhealthy eating habits, pandemic pounds, you're correct. Americans, by and large, are burned out, overwhelmed, and just plain tired. The pace of work was unsustainable. So this is contributing to what's potentially mislabeled as quiet quitting. Now, this pace of work was also fueled by several factors, two of which are a lack of healthy boundary settings once work moved inside of your life, and survivor's guilt. With work now inside the home, it was just too easy to work more. Besides, Americans tend to use being busy as a coping mechanism. Survivor's guilt from the massive layoffs during 2020 spurred further this tendency towards overworking, and this overworking syndrome, if you will, lasted until it couldn't any longer. On top of this, in 2020 is what I call the Great Reflection. The first time many of us in our adult working lives had a chance to actually pause, whether you wanted to or not. Many people really didn't like what they saw, which fueled the ensuing Great Resignation. Unfortunately, some of those job hoppers ended up boomerangers and landing right back where they started. And that's simply because they didn't understand the why fully behind their desire to leap from their current position. And they didn't understand necessarily maybe how to leverage their strengths, didn't remove the old baggage. So some job moves didn't flourish. But what about the Great Reset? Oops. I'll get it together. The new work era is being defined right now. Now, this is extremely exciting and also extremely painful all at the same time, as some of you have already alluded to. Most people know that the way we work just simply doesn't work anymore, but they aren't sure what to do about it. And additionally, I'm not just discussing hybrid versus remote, by the way, which neither one is the answer, unfortunately. But everything from the corporate structures, which we know and maybe don't necessarily love, to how we fundamentally interact as people are all shifting. Okay. So the future of work is literally evolving in front of our face. Now, some of this is due to changes brought forward by the pandemic. Most, however, are actually due to generational value and priority differences. And as I shared in my recent keynote with the Project Management Institute, how younger professionals view success and happiness is very, very different than my generation or generations before me. And quite frankly, I can't blame them. I can't blame them for questioning society's shallow success expectations or the trappings thereof, which can also lead to what I call corporate slavery. In turn, this is driving different expectations of employees for employers, so what people are expecting from their companies, and driving different behaviors in the workplace. The challenge is companies aren't sure how to even respond to this right now. They realize that change is needed, but they don't know where to begin. What's truly alarmed to businesses is that work is actually no longer a priority. Oh, you mean we're not a priority? We're not going to get your blood, sweat, and tears? What are we going to do if you're not going to work 15 hours a day like you've been doing for the past 2 years? Oh my God, it's called quiet quitting. No, not necessarily true. Now, some people, to be fair, are doing the bare minimum. But by and large, what you're actually seeing is a response to unsustainable workplace. Make sense? Let me hop over here and just take a look and see what we've got here in the comments. We got some other people tuning in. Great to see you from Nebraska, Indiana. Someone says working remotely is causing stresses. I noticed of various kinds. Yes, in fact, it does. And working remotely isn't necessarily the answer. In fact, depending on your work style, working remotely can actually be detrimental to your productivity. And you may be less effective than you were working in person. But hey, who wants to commute? I know if you live in Houston, Texas, hey, you might be looking at an hour and a half one way. 3 hours out of your day is not something people want to sacrifice anymore, particularly now that you're enjoying, hopefully, more time with family. Someone mentioned Robert. He said, I'm with Honeywell Smart Energy, watching from Raleigh, North Carolina. Great to see you. Someone else mentioned developing the ability to become comfortable with the uncomfortable is really important. Yes. And we'll be talking more about that in a moment. So yeah, companies are freaking out a little bit because work is no longer a priority. And some bigger growing pains question actually might be for a lot of people, are my coworkers crazy? Maybe. No, I'm just kidding. Crazy isn't necessarily the right term. The variance in people's behavior that we're seeing right now is both a direct result of pandemic stress, disaster fatigue, isolation impacts on the brain, and success in the shifts in the success paradigm. So we're seeing major shifts in how people view success, what they think success is, and what success looks like. Now, historically, most of us will agree that the media has pounded into our brains that success is having the fancy house in the right neighborhood, and our kids going to the right school, and we're driving the right vehicle. I always laughed when I first moved to Houston, Texas, that instead of the Toyota Corolla being the average car of the American family, it became the BMW. Oil and gas bubble. It just made me laugh. So it just, people had this notion and they were living in this box. Well, that is being challenged. Okay. Well, some other things we might be seeing that might make us think our coworkers are crazy. For example, elevated sensitivities. Now, how many of you are seeing elevated sensitivities in the workplace? Let me know. Give me a thumbs up or raise your hand or what have you. Now, this is probably due to prolonged exposure to elevated, what we call threat levels. So from a psychological perspective, when you live in constant uncertainty for a significant period of time, your limbic brain, or your animal brain, if you want to call it that, elevates its threat awareness. So most people have been actually living constantly in a state of fight or flight and danger awareness for almost 3 years. So what do you think that's going to do to your brain and body? If you're thinking probably nothing good, you're right. And as a result, limbic brain is on the alert for threats, any threats, by the way, which is including your opinion, political connections, or any change that you might propose. Heaven forbid you propose more change right now. It's really a struggle for those people who do identify them with being change agents within organizations, because people are putting on the brakes even more than normal. They're change exhausted. And that's because, let's just say your capacity for change is this cup, right? And pandemic, personal changes, work inside your home, maybe stresses in the family, etc. Maybe you had COVID, maybe family members have COVID. You can see where this is going, right? So your capacity for stress, for change, for uncertainty is filling up. So anything else just spills over the top. So that's what we're seeing right now with people. It's not that they're crazy, or they're not trying to be mean or an anchor or dragger or I don't know, bad, irritating to deal with. It's not that they're trying to be this way most of the time. It's just simply that their cup runs over when it comes to stress. So I discussed this in a little bit more detail during one of my LinkedIn live streams in the spring. And I called it Dealing with Crazy People. Because people can't drive you crazy if you don't give them the keys. And I discussed some more in depth what you can do, but let's share a little bit about what you can do if you are experiencing this in either your personal or your professional life. One of the things is to use empathy and the knowledge of empathy to temper your responses and give them grace. So maybe what's driving it's stress. It's something going on in personal life. It's not just necessarily you. Use empathy to give them grace and remain calm. That's absolutely essential, because when you remain calm, this other person will respond positively to your calm state and reduce the threat level. Then you can start to have an open dialogue. When you are also openly curious about differing viewpoints and just really asking in a non-judgmental way, really, okay, well, I hear you and I understand. Can you share with me a little bit about why? And just really being non-judgmental in your tone and in your presence, that helps them reduce that threat level. And then you can actually have a conversation. But right now, what we're seeing is people's threat levels are all elevated. So they're like, oh, you're a threat. And they're like, no, you're a worse threat. And then it just escalates until we actually see friendships break down. And we don't want that, right? So empathy and non-judgmental communication are absolutely critical now more than ever. And this, by the way, is also an essential leadership trait. Leaders, in order to lead effectively, truly must embody this more centered and calm state, which can be a little interesting when you're having your cup already full too, right? So let's talk about also the self redefined and how you can thrive. Now, as I mentioned, the Great Reflection created a paradigm shift in how people view work, life, community, etc. Now, more than ever, people are questioning their path and seeing they need to realign to their true north. We want to become more resilient, but it oftentimes becomes confused with grit. A little bit of research on grit, if you will, and some of you are probably familiar with that term, particularly if you're in America. Americans like the term true grit, and true success comes from true grit. The challenge is, and I quote this from actual white paper research, they're proposed that if grit reflects trait-based resilience, it should have a positive relationship with resilient outcomes. In both cases of this study, the pattern of correlations suggests that grit is not a measure of resilient personality. Grit appears to be unrelated to hardiness, and grit has no consistent relationship with potential indicators of resilient outcomes. Why? We all know that grit has everything to do with growth and success, right? I mean, that's America was built on grit. Well, the problem, as I shared in this Forbes article, is grit is typically adopted by individuals who also identify with being very hard on themselves. They believe they should constantly exceed expectations, which doesn't leave a lot of room for fueling resistance. For fueling resilience. Yeah, leaves a lot of room for fueling resistance for sure, but not necessarily resilience. Resilience isn't about pushing yourself harder and sacrifice. It's actually about prioritizing well-being. And in order to have the energy to be agile and adaptable to bounce back from setbacks, that's what is resilience. So it's that energy to be agile and adaptable to bounce back from setbacks. In fact, the harder you push yourself, the more agitated your brainwaves become, which reduces clarity of thought, the ability to respond intentionally to situations, and encourages the more negative response sectors of the brain to become more active. So, for example, your frontal lobe, your right side of your frontal lobe is actually your positive poly, and the negative side is the negative Nelly. Well, the more agitated your brainwaves become, your limbic brain is like having a hot wire, high-speed highway between your negative Nelly, and you may not necessarily respond as well to certain situations. So you have to focus on well-being. That's incredibly important because only prioritizing your well-being, your sense of self-clarity, are you actually able to make smart decisions. Now, here's the deal. We all know that we should focus on our well-being and self-care and yada, yada, yada. And a lot of us have it confused with taking long walks and bubble baths. It's not necessarily that. We know we should because, and we know we should take care of ourselves because we can't thrive when we're stressed. We know this. Yet, most high achievers kind of stink at making self-care stick. We're not very good at it. And there's a lot of really good reasons why and how to work through this. For one thing, again, you don't have to be a yoga guru, great at meditation, or even enjoy bubble baths to have a healthy well-being and easy well-being strategy. And if you want to know more about this, tune into our next session when the Elevate Your Impact series. So it's all about well-being. Well, let's talk about how you can make a shift in your strategies, particularly if you're a leader. Because leaders also must shift gears on the skill sets needed to elevate impact in the future of work. The biggest emphasis in change is understanding how critical EI versus or EQ versus IQ is. Now, EI is emotional intelligence. IQ, of course, we all know what that is. Most experts who are experts in their industry may probably argue with this. They think, oh, well, EI is not more important than IQ. In fact, you need to be an expert in your industry, particularly in those industries which are highly technical. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Okay, I'm not advocating for not having any knowledge at all in your industry and just leaning on your people skills. That's not necessarily the path forward. However, experts tend to be experting a little too much. And what happens is that reduces their ability to lean positively into their empathy and emotional intelligence quota. Now, there's volumes of research that proves the importance of emotional intelligence and its factor in success. The other good news is that EI can be developed. It's a learned skill, not simply a latent talent. In fact, a lot of emotional intelligence actually comes from young children seeing how their parents interact. And that impacts their ability to respond agile and adaptively to situations. Let me hop over here and see some comments here. Thank you for sharing. There was an article that I'll be talking about in a moment, or just talked about. And thank you for sharing that. That's in the comments. And also, if you've registered for the event, you will get that in email as well. So Pamela mentioned we're expected to run a marathon daily, which is impossible. Absolutely, Pamela. It is impossible. It's impossible to continually elevate yourself to this excess of exceeding expectations. And what's a little frustrating to me that I'm seeing in this quiet quitting term is that some people are using kind of a blanket statement, and it's affecting a lot of people who are just simply trying to dial back to a more reasonable pace of work, right? So that's one reason why I kind of pinged the quiet quitting, because I feel like it's falsely labeled. Let's see. Someone else mentioned, EIEQ leadership is vital, and doing this wrong has hurt me badly in the past. Terribly. Yes. Amen. Because I was there as well. I was not very adept. I was actually more fixed-minded versus growth-minded. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But, as most of you have heard of fixed versus growth mindsets. And by the way, you might be relieved to know that you're not either one or the other. It's a state of being. So you may either have, at the moment, a more growth mindset state, and then some situations may trigger a more fixed mindset state. But a lot of people, unless they have the knowledge, and this is one reason why I'm so passionate about sharing what I know, is unless they have that knowledge, they are totally unaware that they can shift their mindset. And that's why this knowledge is so incredibly powerful and empowering, particularly now. I'm not saying that it didn't matter before, it did, but we didn't pay so much attention to it because we're so busy what nexting our lives. We're so busy getting to the next thing on the to-do list, or just getting through our life. And we never really had a moment to pause and breathe and reflect. And I think in a way, in a backhanded, double-edged sword kind of way, 2020 did that for us, whether we liked it or not. So you will be relieved that EIEQ can be developed. And as I shared in this Forbes article as well, I discussed the positive habits that are easy to develop and absorb to develop yourself as a leader and develop these essential skills that are, I would say, evolving to be more important and more of a priority rather than simply the technical expertise or even the managerial administrative side of management. Now, in reverse order, elevated EI, emotional intelligence, empowers you to connect to other essential skills that are key for the changing workplace, such as empathy, authenticity. It also informs you when to communicate and when to shut up, but when to communicate with more candor to facilitate trust. Now, it's really interesting to note, about a couple months ago, I would say maybe 3 months ago, it's a material, I was reading about one of the keys to thriving in the quote unquote never normal or a highly uncertain state of being at the moment. And one of those in the workplace, particularly, actually in the personal life too, I would have to argue, is elevating communication and candid communication, because people need that candor to kind of cut through the noise. Because we hear a lot of the platitudes, and we just don't have bandwidth for that. I anymore. So having that candor is really important, appropriately when appropriately used. So interesting to note about the number 2 in this slide is that I shared and also shared this in my best-selling book, Elevate Your Career from Impact and Income. When you drive credibility, you drive your own credibility, you do, but you don't determine it. Other people do. So your success is actually a societal response. Does that make sense? Your success literally relies on other people's perspectives of you. So your behaviors drive those perspectives. And if our behaviors aren't in alignment with who we truly want to be, it may not necessarily net you the positive results you want to see. So it's you drive your credibility. I'll say that again. You drive your credibility, but you don't determine it. Other people do. So because your success relies on other people's perspectives of your behavior, right? How they take your behavior, your success is not a result of hard work alone, or your expertise, or your credentials, or your education. Make sense? So your work ethic has less to do with your success than your people skills do. This is another reason why EI, or emotional intelligence, is so absolutely critical. The reason I put know yourself to grow yourself first in this slide is, as my client here, Stephen Fine, quotes, self-awareness is the foundation, the first step towards effective leadership, professional and personal development. And now this is a quote from one of my longstanding clients, Stephen Fine, as I mentioned, and he said, I'm incredibly proud of him. I mean, when he first came to me, he wasn't sure what his strengths were, how he fit into the organization. He was pretty lost. Now, he has elevated both his career and his personal life beyond. I mean, it's just wonderful to see. And the main reason is just because what he quoted here, self-awareness is absolutely essential. And I believe that more people are cognizant of this now. So pop in the chat if you agree or disagree, whether people are more aware that self-awareness is absolutely critical. And in order to grow professionally and personally, the ability to be introspective and in a healthy, balanced way, not in a judgy, critical way, while being open to adjusting your behavior in alignment with your core self is non-negotiable. So being self-aware is non-negotiable in the never normal. Okay. From this space, you're better able to breed resilience and you can enhance your empathy. You have the clarity you need to make solid decisions while achieving your best work. Just imagine, I mean, if you try to improve something without being self-aware, it's like throwing on something on a wall and see what sticks. I've seen a lot of that in my continuous improvement days, but it's a gamble. You don't know if what you're doing is actually making your situation worse. And as some of you already know, self-awareness is a characteristic of being in a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset state. In a fixed mindset, as we mentioned, you might not even believe that your behaviors can even be changed, and you're stuck and you can't shift your life perspective. You're just who you are. How many times have I heard, well, this is just who I am. You'll just have to deal with it. That's a false belief, and it's incredibly common. Now, one way to encourage personal growth is to seek discomfort. And at the moment, you don't have to look very far. But on the other hand, one of the challenges we face when living in constant uncertain times is we hold on to comfort much more tightly, right? And we resist change even more than usual. So let me know if you're seeing that. The outcome of this is increased tension and misalignment. When the world is changing, you either get on the bus or get forgotten. Now, a simple strategy to encourage self-awareness and growth is to have an open discussion with someone who has a very different view and belief structure than you do. And you have lots of opportunities for that as well. But be open, curious, non-judgmental. And the empathy we mentioned earlier, just have an open, curious mindset. Learn more about them and their why. This does not mean that you have to agree with them totally or adopt their methodologies. It's an exercise in empowering your brain's neuroplasticity, its ability to accept and consider new concepts, which, by the way, becomes really important the more candles get on your birthday cake. And another benefit of becoming more self-aware and open to growth, it's a key trait decision makers are looking for in leaders. They want to see someone who's open for self-development, because only then can that person evolve and grow the people they lead, right? So let's talk about how to elevate your impact. Now, some of these, to be fair, were key before the pandemic ever occurred. All right. And they still are important, maybe now more than ever. And number one, know your leadership's priorities and strategic vision. What is that? Well, that's based on your role. Position yourself wisely within the leader's vision to deliver on what matters most to decision makers while staying ruthlessly attuned to your preferred professional pathway. Don't forget your professional target and just go off and do whatever. Be strategically savvy about what you say yes to, and be agile and adaptable to new opportunities as you set your boundaries. So, what I don't advocate for is obsessive planning. We are pre-COVID, we were very good at this, obsessive planning to minute detail. What that does, whether you're thinking about some projects need to be obsessively planned, but we're talking about our career trajectory or leadership advancement strategy, what have you, that may not necessarily serve you, because what it does is it locks down opportunities to show up. And these opportunities may not show up in the way you thought they would. But if you plan to the minute detail, you may actually put blinders on to those opportunities that would serve you quite well. And on the other hand, you don't want to become a firefighter or a dumping ground for unwanted work. So be cognizant of your boundaries. For number two, connect with those key influencers. Now, most of us already know this, to be fair, but we don't really do a great job of it. And by the way, this is not only helpful for your personal professional development, this is also encouraging for your leadership development, because as a leader, it's important for you to network more broadly, whether that be for your company's benefit or for your own. Usually it's both. So network strategically across your cross-functional groups so you can get work done a lot faster within your organization. You also connect with those influencers while developing key relationships with potential supporters and like-minded professionals. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that's super hard or remote. I mean, gosh, I'm always staring at a camera all day. I get it. And you can leverage technology. You don't always have to have a wild chat with somebody or schedule a Zoom session. You can leverage tiny moments to really stand out and stay top of mind when you're working remotely. How do you do that? Well, almost everybody has a messaging feature. Maybe you just send a smiley face or a, hey, I hope your weekend was good. It's just small things. You would be amazed at how important those really small acts of kindness actually are. Okay. Now let's talk about number three, expressing your goals. Most of us really are bad at this. I was bad at it. Most of my clients aren't very good at it either. We think we do, but really what we want is our hard work to speak for itself, and it doesn't. So we need to communicate our broad personal goals to your leaders and your supporters within your network or within your organization when appropriate. If you have the right opportunity, remember to include how it will add value to your business, because this is a big gap and what I see a lot of times with my clients. Let's just say you're seeking to move up within your organization. Well, you don't really tell those key decision makers how you moving up is going to add value to the business. You talk about how great you are, maybe some wins you had in the past, but you're not putting forth a business case. Because if you do, this will help get buy-in from your leadership for near-term goals, as well as certifications, potentially, training, or continuing education. And don't forget your career contributions. As I mentioned earlier, you don't just want to lean on those, and you also definitely don't want to forget them. So collect your kudos, collect your wins, actually put it in a calendar every quarter just to jot down what you managed to accomplish, what you've achieved, and don't forget the impact of it. And discuss your wins and progress in a factual way with your leadership, with your one-on-one meetings. Don't wait till the performance review to share how much you've accomplished. And if you are a leader, make sure you open the door for opportunities for your team to do this as well. I have witnessed very clearly leaders who don't make enough time for their teams to do this. And what happens is it becomes a little dogfighting match. And that does not help breed good team synergies. It becomes competitive, and that's not what you want. You want a collaborative team synergy. You don't want a competitive cycle. Everybody trying to one-up one another and get your attention. Hey, look at me. Hey, look at me. That's not what you want. So make time and be intentional about, hey, who has wins to share, right? And don't be afraid or shy of sharing your own wins as a leader. They want to know what you're up to, and that helps them understand how to prioritize their work as well. A lot of leaders don't even think about that. They think, oh, well, I really don't want to talk about me, but people want to know what's going on in your life. And that's a really important aspect of becoming more authentic and more transparent, which is really critical in the future of work. Last but not least, take the initiative and ask. It's critical to ask decision makers about opportunities, okay? Because if you don't ask, they don't know you care. They just think you like what you're doing forever. But be specific about your goals and be cautious about usurping someone else's role, right? So don't assume someone will volunteer you for key roles before asking you first. That may not happen, so make sure you ask. Use your expertise and dedication, but it doesn't speak for itself. All right. And most importantly, my friends, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So we talked about that cup being really full earlier, but if you don't put more things back in it from a well-being and self-care standpoint, you won't have much more energy to give. So you can't pour from an empty cup. And elevating your impact actually has little to do with taking on more. Busy is typically the enemy of productive. And by remaining self-aware, targeted, and adaptable on your professional path, you will find it a lot easier to successfully increase your impact. With the intentional application of these strategies, you'll thrive through disruption. And most importantly, it's been a pleasure. Most importantly, it's been a deep, deep pleasure to share these key strategies that leaders at all levels can leverage to stand up, speak out, move up in the never normal. And if you're interested in more resources or discovering how to access your zone of genius to elevate your impact, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You're welcome to access my Zone of Genius Pathway Guide on my website as well at coachyurban.com. And without further ado, I'm opening the door for questions. I do have a live stream and podcast. You're welcome to connect with that as well. I have guests from around the world sharing casual conversations that are changing lives and careers. So tune in on your favorite channel. Coffee's optional, but it's recommended. Now I'd love to hear from you. Let's see what kind of comments we have here.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Aaron. So if folks, as Aaron mentioned, we are at the Q&A section of the segment of the presentation. Please post your comments in the, excuse me, please post your questions in the comments and chat section, and we'll get to them for Aaron to answer. So
Yeah.
Aaron, before we go on to our audience questions, I just did have a couple of my own that I'd love to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned a lot about the future of work, what that's going to look like, how people can prepare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's common belief now that while fully remote may not work, doing a sort of hybrid, I think we're
That
in a
doesn't work
more
either.
yeah, we're in a more a world more accepting of remote work than before. So my
Mm-hmm.
question is, you know, any thoughts on how we can develop the next generations of leaders in a more remote accepting world? Sorry, that should
Right, right.
worded better.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And before I answer that, let me give you a tidbit into my crystal ball here. Actually, I do have an 8 ball on my desk, but it's not very good at telling the future. At least not very accurate. So looking into the crystal ball, let's put it this way. Google and Facebook invested billions of dollars in AR and VR in 2020. Very interesting that they did that. Now, why? Well, we can extrapolate that as we recognize that remote doesn't necessarily work for everything, and hybrid, it doesn't really work either. Neither does in person. What do? We want to have the flexibility and adaptability in our work and professional lives. And we still want that magic of those moments in the office where you walk past somebody and you get so much more done. It's much more effective. So what can we do? Well, enter virtual reality. I predict that in the future, and not too distant future, in fact, we will all be signing in to our virtual avatar in the workspace and conducting business in virtual reality. That is where the future is headed. Now, the challenge here is, ladies and gentlemen, that still doesn't necessarily give us some of the in-person gratification that we get from our brain. It does excrete certain hormones that are beneficial for our well-being. I'm not sure that's going to happen in virtual reality. So we'll see how we move forward. Now, to answer this question directly, leadership in the virtual and remote workspaces, like how can we do that? Well, one, we have to acknowledge that just because you're working remotely doesn't devalue your contributions, if that makes sense. So, and the bonus of this is the work paradigm is shifting. Now, to give you some context of why this corporate structure that we know and probably don't love very much has been around since the dinosaur. Okay, it came from medieval hierarchical outline, and that's where it came from, and it hasn't changed much. And the old guard, if you will, those people who really held on to this more hierarchical, siloed mentality, they are moving out of the workplace by and large. And the younger generations coming in see that this really doesn't work. So stay tuned for more. But I see that remote work is becoming the norm, and people will just think it's normal to interact with someone in a more virtual platform. So this question may not necessarily be needed, if that makes sense, because it become more of a normal state. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Thanks so
Mm-hmm.
much.
Mm-hmm.
This next question, and you've gone over a lot of this skills already, but just if you'd be okay with summarizing real quick again, what skills and capabilities are the most critical going forward in offering a true competitive advantage for maybe not necessarily
Right,
well not aspiring leaders, I guess,
right.
in the workplace.
Sure, sure. For anybody, like I mentioned, self-awareness is absolutely critical. That's the number one step. And from there, you can grow. Without that self-awareness component, you can't. Now, some things that will help breed self-awareness, again, is seeking out some people who may not necessarily agree with you, and just picking their brain, being openly curious. Other things that help are actually intentionally going out and getting feedback in the form of maybe 360-degree reviews. Understanding how other people perceive you is incredibly important to understanding what small shifts you need to make in your behaviors or the things that you do to align with the brand that you want to be perceived as, because you kind of live in your own head. It's sort of like an echo chamber. You don't necessarily understand fully how your behaviors and responses impact other people unless you ask them. So that's really important. So that more open-minded growth mindset, being self-aware, seeking out feedback is really, really critical. And it's easy to do. It's not a challenge. It's not some unsurmountable skill. The other part of it's growing more EI, EQ, emotional intelligence, which is literally the ability to understand your own emotions, identify the emotions of others, and respond appropriately. That's literally what that is. And it breeds more empathy. Authenticity is another key thing that people are asking for in leaders. Now, some people think, what does that even mean? Like, do I have to bring my dirty laundry to work? No, you don't have to bring your proverbial dirty laundry to work. But what I do encourage is that you are a full person. So we always brought our full person to work. We just necessarily talk about that full person, right? So talking about your kids or your dogs or your hobbies, yeah, that's a good thing. And I think one of the positive sides, Jonathan, to the pandemic and being forced into remote workspace is that people saw that, gosh, you have a life. And particularly when one's
Mhm.
cat walked across the computer screen, right? You know
Mhm.
that there's a life out there. And that kind of opened the doors. So moving forward, you notice I didn't mention anything about education or credentials and that sort of thing. I am seeing a lot of people putting in more debt and on themselves by getting their MBA. I don't necessarily think
Mhm.
that's needed until you seek a senior level leadership role. Okay, and then maybe your work will pay for it. But we do have some really important questions over here. I want to make sure I get to those if that's okay. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I'm not sure where to start. I don't know if we start at the end and work our way back up or the other way around. I know we mentioned some of these already.
So
Um,
I believe our first questions that we haven't gotten to actually is close to the bottom by
mhm,
Eric.
mhm.
Eric does ask, authentic with or without boundaries.
with
Yeah.
boundaries. Yes, definitely know your boundaries. And it really helps tremendously, Eric, to understand like what your priorities and values are first before you start setting boundaries. Because some boundaries for one person may be totally atrocious to somebody else, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily want to take a phone call at 8 p.m., but for someone else, maybe that's perfectly fine because they didn't start working till noon, right? That's just where their peak energy zone is. So boundaries are very, very personal, and it's knowing what drains you, what gives you energy, what's your top values and priorities, what's important to you. Then you can set your healthy boundaries. But yes, you want to be authentic within boundaries. So, again, keeping in mind the social boundary as well. I mean, right now we still have certain social expectations. So certain things that you want to be authentic about, whether in a leadership role or not, in the workplace, well, we want to make sure that's appropriately authentic, right? We're not coming in going, yeah, I got really drunk over the weekend. Yeah, that's probably not going to help you when it comes to elevating your leadership presence,
Mm,
right? So those social expectations still are in place. And whether we like it or not, our success is largely driven by other people's perception of us, not just by what we do. Of course, it's driven by
right.
what we do, but it's how it's reflected in other people, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Well, Eric, hope that answers your question. Thanks for sending that question. And thank you, Aaron. This
Mhm.
next question, Chris asks, do you have any advice for self-promotion for introverts?
Absolutely, because self promotion is super uncomfortable for anybody, usually. Now, unless you're a diehard extrovert, in those cases, maybe not because they do it just naturally and don't even think about it. So choose your time. You don't want to necessarily all of a sudden become, chatty Cathy at every single meeting and talk about everything. But let's just say if you're a leader, you can actually, as I mentioned before, open up the opportunity for your team and yourself to start making it a process that's just normal at every meeting. Who has wins or kudos to share? You can share one of your own. That's one way to do it. It's a subtle way. Maybe even if you're an individual contributor, you can even do this. Another way is to be intentional with your leadership. And if they're not setting regular one-on-one meetings, ask them to. Hey, can I have 15 minutes? I just want to touch base on what I'm doing or how I'm doing in certain areas and make sure I'm on the right track and use that opportunity to share what contributions you've made and the impact of those contributions on the company, the client, your team, what have you. So that's a way to do it that's a little bit more intentional. It's an easy process to follow. You don't necessarily have to like go, oh, I'm talking to so-so. Make sure I stick a nugget in there. And if appropriate, you certainly can. Let's just say you have an opportunity to talk to the executive VP of whatever. Okay, great. As you're chatting about strategy, you can go, I really want to talk about some wins, myself and my team have been able to accomplish. I'm really proud of them. And of course, put yourself in the picture. That's another way to do it. So you're promoting them, but you're also not sidelining yourself. That's another thing, honestly, Chris, that I do see a lot of professionals do, particularly high achievers, and sometimes not necessarily just introverts, right? They will sideline themselves and they'll make it all about my team, all about the team. Well, yes, it's the team and it's also you. Okay, so don't sideline yourself. And when someone gives you a compliment, just say thank you. Don't say, oh well, let's just downgrade that compliment. Accept the
Hmm.
compliment. It's good practice.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Aaron, and thanks for the question, Chris. So Aaron, we did have a question earlier that I accidentally missed. And folks, if we didn't get your questions earlier, feel free to repost them in the chat again. We'll get to all of them. Just we've gotten a lot of comments. But this next question, Stephen asks, most companies are about results, not relationships. Where's the balance?
Yeah, true. Very true, Stephen. That's what we see. And where do I start with this one? Because it's a really long answer, or could be. Part of the reason is the corporate structure. It actually never worked.
Mm,
It never did. We put up with it. So, because we weren't given a choice, to be fair, we graduated college, we went to the workplace. Nobody ever asked, "Hey, do you like this corporate structure?" I mean, no, of course we didn't. Usually, we just put up with it because that's what we had, and we had to walk into it. So, the reason we're seeing this results driven is because companies aren't as aware as they should be about the connection between relationships and revenue. There's a saying that your networking is your career currency. Well, relationships are revenue for business. So when it comes to the bean counters, if you will, those people who are looking at the finances, those individuals, their work style does not necessarily include a lot of people focus. Okay, so if you're not already familiar, there's a variety of different work styles. I tend to coach on predominantly 4 different work styles, but the work style that gravitates towards people who are financially driven, data driven, aren't necessarily people who are also seeking out crowds and talking to a lot of people. They're not necessarily people driven. They're task driven first. So that's another reason why you're seeing this, is because of the work styles that gravitate to that particular role, and the fact that the corporate structures never really worked to begin with. They weren't people centric, right? And to be people centric, they need to reorganize in terms of value streams instead of silos. And I could go on at some links. So if you want to reach out to me on Facebook, we can continue this conversation. Or sorry, not Facebook, but LinkedIn. Yeah, don't reach out to me on Facebook. LinkedIn, Facebook, a business, LinkedIn. Reach out to me there, and we continue that conversation. And let me know if you have any other questions or something specific there that I can help you with. So hopefully
Fantastic.
it makes sense.
Fantastic. Thanks, Aaron. And folks, we will be sharing all of Aaron's contact information as well as her channels in the email that we send out to registrants as well as in the comment section shortly. So definitely feel free to reach out to Aaron. I think we are out of questions, so I guess I'll just close it off with one last question of my own. So I
Mhm.
think when you mentioned earlier that the corporate kind of like model doesn't work, I
Mm.
definitely think research does show that. Um, but with this kind of like new changing landscape,
Mm.
companies are expecting their employees to kind of like continuously learn and adapt and change, but kind of not, they're kind of afraid to kind of like experiment and adapt themselves. So my
Mhm.
final question is, how can those organizations kind of experiment safely in a risk-averse environment?
Right, do a pilot. It's always, my years in continuous improvement, we always did pilots before we implemented it fully, any strategy or change or what have you. So do a pilot and see how it works first before you implement. So the risk tolerance or the risk factor is decreased. And one of the challenges you see with companies is, particularly publicly traded companies, is they have to report to stakeholders on a quarterly basis, or shareholders rather. And shareholders don't really want to see you lose any money. And some changes require a temporary loss in revenue to net bigger downstream rewards, if that makes sense. So,
Mhm.
and one of the CEOs I coached, he was like, the worst thing he ever did was go work for a publicly traded company, because he's a very innovative person. He just felt stifled. He couldn't make those innovations because they wanted early results. And it's just too short a turnaround for some larger innovation. So we do have some more questions coming in right now. And
Yes,
let's
actually,
see.
yes, I do
Yeah,
see that.
Pamela mentioned, have you read Character Disturbance? And do you find a lot of that in corporate America? So character disturbance, I'll have to look that up a little bit more. That's not a term I'm widely familiar with, but I believe I know where you're going with that. So corporate America is experiencing a lot of disturbance, and character is how people are showing up differently, if I'm reading that correctly. So yes, we're finding a lot of that in corporate America right now because they're having to face completely different success paradigm, and people I mean, a lot of people are quitting, and they're not just going away. I mean, I did one live stream on, where are the people going? Like, where are all these people quitting, and they're going back into the workplace? Where are they going? Well, they're having a non-traditional path, and they're also redefining success. Like, success is not necessarily wearing the brand name clothes and going to and living in just the right place, and they're redefining what success is for themselves. And so we're seeing a lot of very fundamental shifts in as a culture, as a society, and what drives success and what's freaking corporate America out is work is no longer that priority, and it has been for several generations. And they have really lapped that up. I mean, let's just look at 2021. 2021, people work so many more hours. And now that people are absolutely burned out and fried and they cannot, they're being lumped in with this quiet quitting. And I just think that's the biggest a lot of BS I've ever heard, because people are trying to downshift into a manageable level. But corporate America is like, no, we want more. You gave us more. We want more. And that's not good enough. What corporate America doesn't get, and by the way, corporate America are leaders who have been too disassociated with their people. What they don't get is your revenue and how your company does. It's not because of you and your little stinking decisions you make. Some of it is, but honestly, a lot of companies are successful in spite of themselves because of how hard their people work. And I'll say enough about that. So someone down here says, George, she's mentioned George K. Simmons, PhD, wrote it. So I'll have to look that up. Thank you, Pamela, for sharing that. I want to learn more about character disturbance. Let's see. I think that's it for the questions now. If you do have any more questions, you just know that you can reach out to me directly.
Yeah, and folks, thought I just added your contact information, but let me do that one more time. I think it didn't go through the first time. Tech issue sometimes. But yeah, folks, just added Herb Erin's Linktree link, which you can find all of her channels at. So feel free to reach out to her, connect with her if you have any questions or need any advice. She's definitely a great career coach. So yeah, unfortunately, we are out of time. I think we could go on forever about the continuously changing landscape. But
don't forget the next series. We will be talking about leadership well-being, and then also how to find your zone of genius in, I think it's November. So it will be a lot of fun. Much more to come.
Yes, definitely. And folks, Erin, we really appreciate you joining us today and giving our audience your insight into how they can elevate their impact in a continuously changing landscape.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
And thank you to everyone for attending today's live stream webinar and for your great questions. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will be sending a short survey as well as the links provided in today's presentation to all registrants after this event, and would love your feedback. Our next webinar in the Elevate Your Impact series will be on Wednesday, October 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern. The registration link has been provided below. Sorry, give me 1 second. Let me just add it to the stream. All right, it's been added below and in the comments section as well. Please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to our channels on social media, and check back daily for future live stream updates. Have a great day, everyone.